Is a recession in the forecast for the United States?
It is the question many Americans are asking as the financial health of the country appears to become more strained. Earlier this year, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates twice in an effort to slow inflation, which is at a 40-year high. The rising interest rates mean consumers will spend more on borrowing money for things like credit cards and home and car loans.
On top of that, the U.S. economy shrank during the first quarter of the year by 1.4%. That is in stark contrast to the economy growing rapidly in 2021, and that was by 5.7%. Now, all of this change has consumers trying to figure out which way is up, which seems to change by the day. Joining us now is Christopher Rugaber. He is an economics reporter for the Associated Press. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, inflation at this point, of course, sky high. Gas and home prices also high. The supply chain struggle has been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. Of course, also the lockdown in China. Now, many are saying these are possibly the hallmarks of a recession. So why are some economists forecasting against that from happening?
Well, great question. I think they don't see it happening anytime soon. And there's still a fair amount of strength in the consumer. Americans have seen a lot of job growth. The economy has seen a lot of job growth. The unemployment rate is very low, down at 3.6%, near a 50-year low. We have seen wages growing in the past year or two since the pandemic. You've heard employers talk about not being able to find workers. And so what that's led to is a lot higher paychecks for a lot of people. In the aggregate or in total, you know, those paychecks aren't completely keeping up with inflation. But for many people, they do make it easier to pay these higher prices for many things. So for now, I do think there is a sense among economists that there is some cushion here. You hear the same thing from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, that with strong consumer spending and steady hiring, the economy is in generally good shape for now.
Right.
And we'll see how that lasts.
You really do paint sort of a mixed picture, right? Because we've got inflation on one hand, but we do have strong consumer spending. Like you said, people are seeing a little increase to their paychecks, a little bump. But when do you think the cost of everything going up will catch up with consumers? Because right now, as you said, there's still strong spending, but that might stop once the inflation really sticks around for too long, correct?
That's right. I mean, that is the threat. There is certainly also some sense among consumers that, you know, they haven't been able to travel. People are out doing traveling and going to entertainment, you know, going out to see live music or things like that they haven't done for 2 years. And that's another thing that is giving some of a lift to spending. You've seen some of these retailers reporting certainly very mixed, in some cases negative results today and yesterday. But a lot of that reflects people to some degree pulling back on spending on goods and spending more on things like travel. But eventually there is a concern that, yes, this would catch up. I mean, consumers also have a lot of savings coming out of the pandemic in total. On average, people have more savings than they did, in part because they weren't able to spend like they normally did. But those will also run down over time. So, I mean, it's hard to know exactly when. People are certainly looking at later this year. There are some recession predictions for next year that, you know, eventually that's when you'll see the higher interest rates from the Federal Reserve kick in and the impact of inflation also start taking a toll. And so there are those who see a recession next year, to be sure.
And so if we do see a recession next year, as some are predicting, how long do you think it would last, considering the effects of the last one were still being felt more than a decade later?
Oh, right. Well, the hope is that it won't be nearly that bad. You'll be starting again from a place, you know, Americans have less debt than they did certainly in the 2008-2009 recession, when the housing bubble burst and people had, you know, significant mortgages and the home values fell. And that was a real drag on the economy for many years. Here you see less debt on the part of consumers. Again, they had, you know, we're starting from a low unemployment rate at least. And so I think the hope would be that if there's a recession, it's fairly brief, not as harsh as we've seen before. You know, the Fed could certainly then at that point, you know, slow its interest or would likely cut back interest rates in order to help the recovery along. So that is certainly the hope, that it would be a shorter, briefer, and less severe recession.
And of course, no guarantee that we are going into a recession. Just want to make that clear. We don't know yet. All right. Christopher Rugaber, economics reporter for the AP. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.